Church, we are blessed this morning to have Jonathan with us from God's Chosen People. It is an organization that seeks to pray for, evangelize, and disciple the Jewish people. So Jonathan, we want to welcome you, and we're looking very forward to hearing you speak this morning. Y'all welcome him.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I want to start by thanking Pastor Schultz for the invitation to speak. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you all this morning. I know that this church is actually the first church I spoke at when I started my work with Chosen People Ministries, when I came here back in December of 23 to speak on the Jewishness of Jesus' birth. So I'm really thrilled to be back here and to share with you a Jewish look at Jesus' resurrection. So allow me to reintroduce myself. My name's Jonathan. I'm a Messianic Jew. And what that means is I'm a Jewish person who follows Jesus the Messiah, and I express my faith in Jewish ways, living a Jewish life. Both my parents are Jewish, and they're actually the first ones in their families to follow Jesus as the Messiah. And they raised me and my siblings in a Messianic Jewish home where we learned to follow Jesus, who we called by his Hebrew name, Yeshua, while observing Jewish commandments and traditions. So I grew up going to a local Messianic synagogue on Shabbat, celebrating Jewish holidays, and being very involved in the community life. When I was 13, I had my bar mitzvah, the Jewish coming-of-age ceremony when I committed myself as a son of the commandment. And I'm grateful that my parents led me to faith in Jesus, in Yeshua, at a very young age, and that I could grow in my faith and Jewish identity in such a strong community. I attended Kennesaw State University around here and doing a history degree and did my master's of theological studies with a focus in New Testament at Duke. And I want to share with you kind of an experience I had while I was in college. So I was attending the Messianic Jewish Alliance of Americas, their Messiah Conference. This is the largest Messianic Jewish conference in the world. It takes place in Pennsylvania. So this is back in 2016. And so at this conference, there is a lot of Messianic Jews who come in from all over the world, all over the country. And this is a great opportunity for people like you see in the picture. On the next slide, and you see in the picture there, and those are what's called counter missionaries, and they are not missionaries; they're counter missionaries. And what they do is they set up tents at the entrance to the campus where the conference is held, and they wave people in, hoping to have conversations with Messianic Jews in order to talk them out of their faith in Jesus and Yeshua. So they're not part of the conference, but they've found a spot on the campus where the conference is to kind of get Jews to talk to them about, Messianic Jews to talk to them about their faith so they can essentially encourage them to leave it. And I was actually speaking at this conference to the 13 to 30-year-olds on the resurrection of Jesus. I was speaking to the youth there at this conference when I was in college. And I wanted to go down to the tent to kind of test out the arguments that I was going to be presenting to the youth at the conference. So I was like, this is a great opportunity. These guys are there. So let me go down and check it out. So I will never forget what happened down there. So if you see the guy waving there, that's Rabbi Yisrael Blumenthal from the counter-missionary group Jews for Judaism. And he said we could talk about any topic you want to talk about. And so I said, perfect, let's talk about the resurrection of Jesus. He said, yes, we could talk about that. But let me just tell you right now, this is the words of Rabbi Blumenthal. He said, even if I knew that Jesus rose from the dead, even if Jesus was standing right in front of me right now, I still would not believe he's the Messiah. And that took me aback. He said, even if he knew with assurance that Jesus rose from the dead, even if Jesus was standing right in front of him with us right there, that he would not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Why? Well, he told me that in the Torah, in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 13, the Torah shows us that false prophets can perform miracles. So the resurrection would just be a test from God to see whether he, as a Jew, would follow him or follow God rather than following and worshiping a false Messiah. So for him, the resurrection would just be a test. It doesn't mean that he's the Messiah. I had no idea what to say to this. I was taken aback. I did not know what to say. I haven't even considered that. And I was about to speak at the conference on the resurrection to the 13 to 30-year-olds. So I took the opportunity to discuss the historical evidence for the resurrection. We were there for many hours, but I would avoid the topic of what the resurrection means about Jesus being the Messiah. So since 2016, I have devoted much time, energy, resource, and even my own ministry work to addressing this particular objection, this question that Rabbi Blumenthal is not alone in. Many Jewish people, if you bring up the resurrection, especially Orthodox, if they're learned in the Torah, they'll bring up Deuteronomy chapter 13. So what I want to do this morning is share with you, looking at the scriptures and seeing how can we make sense of this. How can we actually see that the resurrection does indicate that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Messiah? So let's start. So let's read the text in Deuteronomy 13 that the rabbi was referring to. So I'll read from verses 1 through 4. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you, to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. Right there we see that the false prophet uses signs and wonders to lead Israel astray, and the text says that the reason they do this, for God is testing you to see whether Israel, the Jewish people, really love God with all their heart and soul. The text says here that they should not follow the false prophet, but follow the commandments that God gave Israel. So the question that I want to ask this text here is, why would a false prophet use miracles as a sign to lead Israel astray? Why would a false prophet use these signs and wonders to lead Israel away from following God? And to answer this question, we need to look at what the Torah says, the first 5 books of Moses, what the Torah says for how we can identify if someone is a prophet. So let's go to Exodus chapter 4. In Exodus chapter 4, God provides Moses with 3 miraculous signs when he appears to Moses and speaks to him through the burning bush. Where we see here, but Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say the Lord did not appear to you? The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he replied, a rod. The Lord said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a snake. And Moses recoiled from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and grasp it by the tail. He put out his hand and seized it, and it became a rod in his hand. And here's the purpose of these miracles. We see that they may believe the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob did appear to you. So these signs were intended to validate Moses as a prophet before Israel, to convince my people, the Jewish people enslaved in Egypt, that Moses was truly sent by God. And we read on in Exodus chapter 4, verse 28 through 31, Moses told Aaron about all the things that the Lord had committed to him, and all the signs about which he had instructed him. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. Aaron repeated all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs, these miracles, in the sight of the people, and the people were convinced. The reason the elders of Israel are convinced that Moses was a true prophet is because God validated him through these miraculous signs. And we see this throughout the story of the Exodus, when Moses goes to Pharaoh and he provides all these plagues through God's power. God continues to show Israel that Moses is truly sent by God. We know the story when Moses and the people go and approach the Red Sea, and they see the sea in front of them, and there's this obstacle as they're trying to escape from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are coming from behind. And so Moses raises his rod, and the Red Sea parts. The Israelites go through it on dry ground, and when the Egyptian army sees this, they go out chasing the Israelites. And what happens is Moses, again, raises his rod, and the sea comes crashing, destroying the Egyptian army. And when the Israelites witnessed this, we read the response in Exodus 14:31. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They had faith in the Lord and his servant Moses. The reason the people of Israel trust that Moses is truly sent by God, that he is a prophet, is because they witnessed how God validated him through these miraculous signs. This is a theme we see throughout what's Jewish people call the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. We see in 1 Kings 18, this is when Elijah, the prophet of Israel, has a showdown with the prophets of Baal, the 450 false prophets of Baal. He says to them that you provide an animal to sacrifice to your God, and I'll provide one to the God of Israel. And the God who answers by fire, he is the true God. Where we read here in verse 36 of 1 Kings 18, the prophet Elijah came forward and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, for you have turned their hearts backward. And after this happens, after he prays this prayer to God, fire comes falling from heaven, and it consumes the offering, the wood, the stone. It licks up all the water that's filling the trench. And the people fall on their faces, and they say, the Lord alone is God. The Lord alone is God. So consistent with the Torah in Deuteronomy 13, Elijah provides a sign to justify his status as a true prophet and bring Israel back to the worship of the true God. So here's the point. God validates true prophets through miracles. And there are many other examples in the Old Testament revealing that God validates true prophets through signs and wonders. And this helps us understand why the false prophet described in Deuteronomy 13 performs signs and wonders. Because God validates true prophets by providing miracles, these signs and wonders, this is what the false prophet is trying to do in their attempt to lead Israel astray. They're mimicking the real thing. So, how can Israel distinguish between a true prophet and a false prophet if they both produce miracles? How is Israel supposed to make this determination? Well, let's look at the text again in Deuteronomy 13. So I'll read it closely here, and let's take a look at what I have highlighted here in yellow. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you, to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of slavery, to make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So I want you to notice in the text that the way that Israel is supposed to evaluate the one claiming to be a prophet is they evaluate their teaching. If they teach Israel to serve other gods, Israel is supposed to know that that miracle doesn't validate them as a true prophet. If they teach the Jewish people to abandon the commandments that God gave Israel, then that teaching indicates to them they should not follow them just because they performed miracles. What's really cool here is that we see here, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. This is actually a callback to the prayer in Judaism called the Shema, which we find in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 and following, where Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then we go down, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. V'havta et Adonai Elohecha. Right? We see that right here in the text. So the way that Israel expresses their love towards God is through obedience to the commandments. The Shema is Israel's prayer of allegiance to God. and they express their love to God through obedience to his commandments. And the false prophet is trying to get them to leave that. They're leading them astray. I found that the Jewish scholar, 12th century Jewish scholar, Maimonides, he's not a follower of Jesus. He actually argued against Jesus being the Messiah. But he is a very highly respected Jewish scholar that even today in Judaism is recognized. And I think he is helpful when looking at Deuteronomy 13. Because when he's writing to an oppressed Jewish community in Yemen, he writes, "We are enjoined to yield obedience to one who asserts that he is a prophet, provided he could substantiate his claims by miracle or proofs, although there is a possibility that he is an impostor. However, if the would-be prophet teaches tenets that negate the doctrines of Moses, then we must repudiate him." He's saying that miracles do validate true prophets, but if the one who's claimed to be a prophet teaches against Torah, then we know that he's not a true prophet. So the question I have now, and maybe you're asking, is how do false prophets perform signs and wonders if God is not the one who is empowering them? Well, I think the New Testament is very helpful here. And again, when we look at the New Testament, it is a Jewish literature written by Jewish people, and even scholars today who are studying the New Testament, who are not followers of Jesus, Jewish, atheist, agnostic, they see the New Testament as books of the Bible that were written by Jews. They see it as Jewish literature. And so I want to show you here the way that can be useful in interpreting Deuteronomy. So in Matthew chapter 12, we see that Yeshua just healed a man who's blind, mute, and oppressed by demons. And we read it right here. "Then a demon-oppressed man who was blind and mute was brought to him, and he healed him, so that the man spoke and saw, and all the people were amazed and said, 'Can this be the son of David?' But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, 'It is only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this man casts out demons.'" So these Pharisees are not questioning whether Yeshua actually performed healing miraculous signs. What they're doing is they're countering the crowd's curiosity that Jesus may be the Messiah, the son of David, by asserting that the source of Jesus' miracles is not from God, but from Beelzebul, the ruler of demons. So here's the point. God validates true prophets through miracles, but the miracles of false prophets come from other sources, and in this case, the Pharisees are attributing it to Beelzebul. Maimonides says something very similar, and I bring up Maimonides because he is not just a Jewish scholar because he's a Jewish scholar respected in the Jewish community. When I share this kind of reasoning with Jewish people, I want to use sources that they respect, and I find Maimonides very helpful here to do that. Because Maimonides says the false prophet is coming to deny the prophecy of Moses. He's commenting on Deuteronomy 13. He says he, meaning the false prophet, is coming to deny the prophecy of Moses. Therefore, we may definitely conclude that he is a false prophet, and everything that he did was performed through sorcery and magic. So what Maimonides is saying there, and what I think he says very rightly, is that if the one claiming to be a prophet teaches against Torah, that teaching helps us know that whatever miracle they performed was done through demonic power, sorcery, magic. It did not come from God. So here's kind of a flow chart to help make sense of this. So if one claims to be a prophet and they produce a miracle, the key to knowing whether they are a true prophet, true or false prophet, is by judging whether the miracle they provide is actually from God's power. And one way to know this is by evaluating their teaching. If they teach against Torah, we know that whatever sign they did was empowered by something other than God. However, if one claims to be a prophet, provides a miracle, and affirms the Torah, then we know that the miracle they provided comes from God's power. And in response, Israel is commanded to obey them because God validates true prophets through miracles. An example of false prophets or people using sources other than God to perform miracles is one from Exodus itself, Exodus 7:22, when the Egyptian magicians mimicked Moses' miracle of making the Red Sea turn to blood. They did that as well. And the text there tells us that they did this with their spells, as an example of someone using power that coming from something or someone other than God. So here's another question that I want to ask. And keep in mind, I'm building this case because I'm showing the response to the rabbi who initially gave me that objection, that the resurrection would just be a test from God. It would not indicate he's the Messiah. And I'm challenging that here and helping us read the scriptures in a way to see the resurrection as indicating Yeshua's messiahship, Jesus' messiahship. So the objection here, or the question here, would be, would God validate a false prophet? And I would say the answer is no, an emphatic no. And this understanding that God alone empowers true prophets is confirmed by Deuteronomy 18. There's two texts in the Torah that speak of true and false prophets, Deuteronomy 18 and Deuteronomy 13. And here in Deuteronomy 18, the text asks and answers the question how to identify a false prophet. We see, and if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. So if the one claiming to be a prophet speaks in God's name, but their prophecy is not fulfilled, Israel knows that they are a false prophet, which leads to the following observation. God would not fulfill the prophecy of a false prophet, and therefore he would not validate the claim of a false prophet by empowering their miracle. What we learn from Deuteronomy 18 is that whatever miracle a false prophet performs to lead Israel astray does not come from God's power, because God would not validate a false prophet. I used this kind of reasoning when I was talking with another counter-missionary from Jews for Judaism, and bringing up this kind of question with him about Deuteronomy 18, and honestly, he really had no response to that. He had not considered Deuteronomy 18 when it comes to that God would not validate a false prophets by empowering their miracle. A Jewish scholar that talks about what does it mean that God is testing Israel? Well, the Lord is testing you by allowing the sign to come true, meaning that God is not going to stop the false prophet from using demonic power to perform a miracle. He's allowing them to do it. But that's different than empowering them to do the miracle. So what key points can we draw from this? Signs that derive from God's power validate true prophets. God would not validate a false prophet. And God tests Israel by allowing false prophets to perform miraculous signs. So that's the data we have. So now let's go back to Matthew chapter 12. So in Matthew chapter 12, we see that Jesus, Yeshua, he engages with the argument and the objection that these Pharisees are giving to him, that he is only able to produce miracles and exorcise demons because Jesus is empowered by Beelzebul. And you can read there in the text how Jesus responds to this objection. But you go on, in verse 38, we see that the scribes and Pharisees are not satisfied by Jesus' answer. And they say, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you." It's interesting because this Greek word for sign, semeion, is the same word in the Greek translation of the Old Testament in Deuteronomy for the sign that the false prophet does. So they're saying, we wish to see a sign from you, meaning whatever sign Jesus gives them, they can still say he's a false prophet using miracles to lead Israel astray. But Yeshua gives them a very specific answer. He says, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Yeshua is saying that the sign to prove that he is the Messiah, the Son of David, that the Jewish crowd thought Yeshua might be, the way that he's going to prove his identity as the Messiah will be comparable to Jonah's experience in the fish. He's going to die and shortly thereafter rise from the dead. So of all the miracles that Jesus could have chosen to demonstrate that he is in fact the Messiah, why did he tell these Pharisees that it would be his resurrection? Well, the truth is that only God raises the dead. He's picking a very specific miracle that the Pharisees would agree and the scribes would agree only God has the power to do. In the Torah itself, Deuteronomy 32:39, We see then that I am he, there is no God beside me. I deal death and give life. In 1 Samuel 2, 1 and 6, we see that here, there is no rock like our God. The Lord deals death and gives life, casts down to Sheol and raises up. This power to resurrect is something unique to the God of Israel. Looking outside of the Bible even, we see that the commentary on 1 Samuel 2:6 in a text called the Jerusalem Talmud. So this is written by rabbis hundreds of years after Jesus, but it's interesting to see the context that they see as this bring to who has the power to raise the dead. Because in their reading of Elisha, they say, "And he, Elisha, said to Gehazi, there is none who raises the dead except for the Holy One. Blessed be he, as it is written in the scripture concerning him. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up." The rabbis of the Talmud agreed that there is none who raised the dead except God, except the Holy One. This is an uncontroversial point in Judaism. Going to the Old Testament, going in the Tanakh, Ezekiel 37, we see here, this is the vision that Ezekiel has of the valley of dry bones that represent the whole house of Israel. And we read in Ezekiel 37, verse 12, "Thus says the Lord God, behold, I will open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people. And I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live. And I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have spoken and will do it, declares the Lord." And I just think that is an awesome picture where we see in Ezekiel the language of resurrection is being used to describe the restoration of Israel, the Jewish people, back into their indigenous ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. And it's really interesting here because we see here, then you shall know that I am the Lord. When God does this resurrection, Israel will know the Lord's identity by witnessing his unique power to resurrect the dead. The resurrection of the dead is something that is anticipated by Orthodox Jews to this day, that there will be a resurrection of the dead that only God has the power to do. So observant Jews will pray 3 times a day this prayer called the Amidah. It's prayed 3 times a day, in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening. And there's a certain section of the Amidah called the Gevarot, which praises God for his might and his unique power to resurrect the dead. So I'll read you this passage that is prayed like 3 times a day by observant Jews. "You are mighty forever, O Lord. You revive the dead. Who is like you, master of mighty deeds? Who can be compared to you, O King, who causes death and restores life and causes your salvation to sprout? You are faithful to restore the dead to life. Blessed are you, O Lord, who brings life to the dead." Like a beating drum, this prayer praises God for his power to resurrect the dead. And I want to read you this really fascinating quote I came across just this week, just last week, on Jewish scholars understanding the centrality of the resurrection in this prayer. So Rabbi Yitzchak Kerzner and Dr. Elisa Aiken, they both say this: "The concept of resurrection is one of the cardinal principles of belief for the Jew. It is so fundamental that the sages, the rabbis, instituted this prayer as the second one of the Amidah, this prayer. This order tells us that once a person recognizes and connects with God, the essence of the first prayer, what necessarily follows is belief in resurrection. The Talmud says that God personally holds 3 keys to the world. One of them is the key of rain, and one is the resurrection of the dead. Those people who have resurrected the dead have been able to do so only because God granted them power to resurrect. We should not think that anyone has this as an independent ability alongside God. The ability always comes from the same source, God. That is why we reinforce 3 times in this verse that this power comes from you, God." So Jewish people, observant Jews, will pray 3 times a day that God alone has the power to resurrect the dead. So we can formulate this argument in this way. Jesus claimed his messianic identity would be validated through the sign of his resurrection. Signs that derive from God's power validate true prophets. God would not validate a false prophet. Jesus rose from the dead. Only God raised the dead. Therefore, we reason that Jesus is the Messiah. The resurrection is God's indication that Jesus is the Messiah. So going back to the objection, we see the Rabbi Blumenthal at the beginning. I mentioned back years ago, he said that Jesus can't be the Messiah because he's a false prophet according to Deuteronomy 13. A succinct response to this is that Deuteronomy 13 helps us see that Jesus' resurrection is God's validation that Jesus is the Messiah who taught Jewish people to live in obedience to the commandments. God is raising from the dead Jesus, and that teaches us that he is the Messiah who told Israel to remain faithful to the commandments that God gave them. And what's so cool is that when we go and turn to the New Testament, we see that this is what Yeshua taught. One of the scribes, in Mark chapter 12, one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that Jesus answered them well, asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus answered, the most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Jesus here actually recites the Shema that I mentioned earlier, this central prayer in Judaism. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So Jesus does not fail the Deuteronomy 13 test. Instead, he upholds the Torah, recites the Shema, Israel's allegiance to God, and in line with other Jewish thinkers, he points to Leviticus 19:18, affirming that love is the substance of the Torah. So the resurrection is not only God's validation that Jesus is the Messiah, it's also God revealing that Yeshua taught the Jewish people to be faithful to keeping the commandments. That's something that the rabbi would think that the rabbi mentioned at the beginning would think that Jesus came to take them away from. But the question is, well, do Jewish people believe in Jesus' resurrection? Well, I do. I'm Jewish. There's many Messianic Jews around that do embrace the resurrection. But I also want to point, as a person who studied this, Pinchas Lapid. He's an Orthodox Jewish scholar who wrote a book called The Resurrection of Jesus, A Jewish Perspective. And he remained Orthodox throughout his life, but he was willing to grant. He says, on the basis of the evidence, he says, I accept the resurrection of Jesus not as an invention of the community of disciples, but as a historical event. That is an Orthodox Jew willing to grant that because he could not deny the historical evidence. And I just think it's really useful to point to this kind of evidence that the rabbi, this Orthodox scholar, brings up when engaging with Jewish people, if they will engage about the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. It's really fascinating work that he put together by Pinchas Lapid. Speaking of resurrection, we know in Ezekiel 37 that this language of resurrection points to God's power to raise the dead. So what does this mean for Jesus' resurrection? In this passage, we see an incredible picture of God restoring Israel physically and spiritually. So Jesus' resurrection is God's revelation that Yeshua is the Messiah, the one who will restore Israel. He is that Messiah. And the argument I'm presenting today, this understanding of the resurrection, is not completely unique to me. Because when we read in Luke's 2-volume work, Luke and Acts, we read in Acts chapter 2, Peter's sermon that he gave on the Jewish festival of Shavuot, where this is when Jewish people celebrate God giving Israel the Torah at Mount Sinai. And Jewish people would come from all over to come to Jerusalem to celebrate this festival. And Peter takes this opportunity in the temple to say this to his Jewish people. He says, Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. God raised him up, loosening the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. He goes on to say, this Jesus God raised up, and of that we all are witnesses. Therefore all the house of Israel should know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Messiah, this Jesus whom you crucified. Peter explains that God had attested that Yeshua, who he is, through these miracles throughout his ministry, as the people themselves know. He was executed as a false prophet sent by the leaders of Israel to Rome, but God raised him from the dead, validating him as both Messiah and Lord. Yeshua's resurrection is that indication. And the resurrection is really central to the gospel. In 2 Timothy 2:8, we see, remember Jesus, Messiah, raised from the dead, descended from David. This is my gospel. That's what Paul says there. And the resurrection there is central. But this idea of the gospel, this idea of the good news, is not something new or unique in the New Testament. It actually predates the New Testament. We go to Isaiah it predates the New Testament. In Isaiah 52, verse 7 through 9, we see this word for good news found there in Isaiah 52, verse 7 through 9. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation. And that word salvation there is Yeshua, who says to Zion, your God reigns. The voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice together. They sing for joy, for eye to eye. They see the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Yeshua's name, Jesus' name, concerns the salvation of the Jewish people as prophesied here in Isaiah 52. And Yeshua is the one who came to save Jewish people and the rest of the world. The good news of the Lord returning to Zion. And who is this Lord? The Lord is Jesus, Yeshua. So with all of this, I just want to encourage you to bring this good news, bring this gospel to Jewish people. In Romans 1, verse 16, Paul says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. In Romans 10, Paul presents really his heart for Israel when he says, brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. In Romans 11, verse 1 and 2, Paul says, I ask, then, has God rejected his people? By no means, for I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. And in Romans 11, verse 26, Paul explains that all of Israel will be saved. And when we look at Israel's salvation, we actually see that Israel's rejection, in large part, because of the majority of the Jewish people in Paul's time and even today, rejected Yeshua as the Messiah, did not embrace him. There was a partial hardening that God put on the Jewish people so that the fullness of the Gentiles could come in, you all sitting here. And what we see here is that in Romans 11 that Paul says that Gentiles are to provoke the Jewish people to jealousy because they have been saved. So really, you yourselves, Christians, have an opportunity to provoke Israel, the Jewish people, to jealousy by living out the life you have as a follower of Jesus, a holy life as a follower of Jesus. And really, it's this kind of provoking Israel to jealousy was actually how my own mother came to faith in Yeshua and Jesus when she was in college, that a Christian was able to share their faith with her so that she may know her Messiah. So I want to encourage you with that. I also want to just let you know about what I'm doing within Chosen People Ministries, as Pastor Schultz mentioned earlier, to bring the gospel to Jewish people. And as he said, we do exist to pray for, evangelize, disciple, and serve Jewish people and help fellow believers like yourselves do the same. So I serve here within Chosen People Ministries in Atlanta, and I work in the Department of Digital Evangelism. So we all know that we're supposed to bring the gospel to Jewish people around the world, and make disciples of all nations. And one effective way to do this is to meet Jewish people where they're at, which is online. where a lot of Jewish people will not be able to ask questions to their rabbi or would be intimidated, not really wanting to come into a church, but they will ask their questions and search them online. And I want to be there to provide answers to those Jewish people who are seeking answers. So in the Department of Digital Evangelism, we have different websites where we produce this kind of content. AboutMessiah.com, answering really short-form articles addressing common questions that Jewish people have about the New Testament, about Jesus, about the Bible. Right now, me and my team are working on producing a YouTube channel called Chosen People Answers, and a podcast where we can talk to Jewish people directly as our audience and really address the concerns and questions they have that may be seeing as roadblocks to accepting the gospel message. 4 times a year, me and my team produce a newsletter for Jewish people that goes out to 16,000 Jewish people so they can see really different articles that address their concerns, their questions, and even on the back, there's an opportunity there to share the gospel with them, so that inviting them to see Jesus as the Messiah. On the ground, I teach Christians about God's love for Israel in churches. I teach Jewish believers in synagogues and conferences about the Jewishness of their faith to encourage them in their walk with the Messiah. And I lead a local Bible study for young adult Jewish believers in my home. So this is what I've committed my life to doing, to reach my own Jewish people with the good news of Jesus being the Messiah. And I just want to invite you and show you ways to support the ministry that I'm doing. I invite you to pray for my ministry. I really see the way in which God uses people to pray and really just intercede for the work that I'm doing. And one way to know in specific ways to pray is you could sign up to receive my monthly prayer letter that I send out. I send out each month so you can know in what particular way specific things to pray for and give you updates on my ministry. What you have is a brochure, and if you open it up, there's a slip where if you tear off that slip, fill it out, give it to me afterwards. That's one way to sign up for the prayer letter or use the QR code. And if you sign up or even use the QR code and show me that you did, I'll give you a free copy of the president of Chosen People Ministries, Mitch Glazer's book. I also invite anyone to partner with me financially. The work I do is dependent on individuals and groups to be able to do the work that I do. So I invite you if the Lord is leading you, to partner with me on a monthly basis, or connect me with friends and family organizations that you think would be interested in partnering as well. I just want to thank Pastor Schultz so much for the opportunity to speak here at Mountain View, and I pray that God blesses your community and uses you to reach Jewish people with the good news of Jesus the Messiah. So thank you all.